Alright, what's going on YouTube? Hidden Cup 4 qualifiers continue. Today we're going to take a look at Bru versus Uzzi. Bru is a very talented Brazilian player, and Uzzi is a fairly skilled Mexican player over here. Here are the home maps. So Bru picks Bay and Hideout, bans Gold Rush. Uzzi picks Cross and Slopes, bans Islands. And Bru will be playing with Chinese, Huns, Italians, Khmer, Vietnamese, and Persians. Vikings were sniped away from him by Uzzi. And other side, the snipe was Lithuanians. We will have Japanese, Indians, Britons, Ethiopians, Celts, and Slavs available for Uzzi. The global bans were Mayans and Mongols. With that being said, I think we can jump into the first game right away, which is going to be on Arabia. So right side is going to be Bru using his primary account, which is Assassin Ostrich. He has two accounts in the top 50. Doesn't really matter which he uses because the ratings of the two accounts are pretty much the same. As far as I know and as far as I have information about him, he's using the Assassin Ostrich account when he's playing in tournaments and when he is pretty much going try hard. Whereas the official Bru account is more like a chill account for him when he just likes to play games. As I said, this doesn't matter in terms of seeding and whatsoever because the two accounts are very, very close in terms of rating. Left side is going to be Uzzi playing in yellow as Ethiopians. So we have an Ethiopians versus Chinese matchup over here. Once again, as I have seen this many times in the Arabia games, I feel like I just like the Chinese here much better for Bru, for the sole purpose of the versatility of the Chinese civilization. One of the most versatile civs in this entire game is the Chinese, whereas Ethiopians are somewhat more one-dimensional towards archers, so you don't have to be a genius to guess what Ethiopians are trying to do here in this one, and since Bru knows that his opponent is a heavy archer civ, it is likely that he's going to mix in skirms, so we're either going to see archers and skirms from Bru here, or potentially scouts and skirms. But whichever the way, I do like the versatility of the Chinese a lot more over here. Also, we'll have a slightly stronger eco than the Ethiopian player. That being said, the base of Bru here isn't that super amazing. He's got double backboards, which makes it pretty hard to lame away. The berries are nice at the back, but the gold mine here is exposed. Stone mines are actually absolutely awful, and the additional golds are also pretty bad. So if you take a look at this gold, that's quite bad over there, and this one is even worse. There's only one wood line that's actually very close to the TC, the rest of them are pretty far apart, so on a scale of 1 to 10, I would give like a solid 3 to this base for Bru. This is gonna be tough for him to defend. If he goes archers, I can see him placing the archer ranges around over here and doing something like walling in between the TC, getting some ranges up here and then walling like this. That could be viable for him, but nonetheless, this map is actually pretty bad for him. On the other side, we'll have Uzzi. His gold mine is on the front as well, which is something I massively dislike. Other than that, the right side of his base is fairly vulnerable. That mill is actually interestingly placed. I am not a big fan of this. Normally, I am one of the people that says that having one tile of gap between the berries and the mill is actually helpful in many cases because there is less villager bumping into each other. So it's going to be very efficient when the villagers gather this berry bush, for example, and drop it off immediately at the mill. However, when you have two rows of freight tiles each, I feel like this is just going to be very far out for the second row of berries. And here in this case, I would have made an argument for placing this one tile closer to the berries. Anyways, Uzzi will be pushing in there right now from the front of his base. He kind of has a comparable map to Bru, to be honest. Maybe a slightly better. The stone mines are once again pretty awful. This one is absolutely in the middle of nowhere. And this one is also pretty hard to protect. Secondary golds are quite exposed as well. You could make an argument for being able to defend this one if you wall this one off here and here. Although I feel like that's just a future project. It's more likely that we're going to see walls, something like that. And we'll probably just see the archer ranges coming up in the front of that gold mine to protect it. That being said, Bru is going to come up with some early walls over here, wants to make sure that he's not going to get rushed, and that is going to be a standard rush timing from Uzzi. I would like to point out that Uzzi has the same villager count as Bru. He's like one villager behind basically, so Bru's Chinese start here wasn't super flawless. Normally you want to be at least 2 villagers ahead compared to your opponent when you're actually playing with Chinese. So this wasn't very amazing from Bru over here. Although you have to keep in mind that he already has Loom. So that's an added effect. Still, I think this could have been a little bit cleaner Dark Age from him. Has 31 seconds of desire time. What actually concerns me a little bit more is that he already has stockpiled 2.5 minutes of Voyager idle time, which is an awful lot in Dark Age. After Loom, there is going to be 2 Voyagers difference, so I guess this is still fine for Brew at the end of the day. But as I said, both players seem to have quite a significant amount of TCI or Voyager idle time over here. So these are things that you don't really want to happen to you. Anyways, Brew is going up at 23 Voyagers, which is basically the equivalent of a Scouts-ish uptime for other civilizations. As you see, actually I miscalculated that. It should be Man-at-Arms timing, so it's 22 pop equivalent. And we are going to have Man-at-Arms most likely here from Uzzi. With such an exposed goldmine, Man-at-Arms is a completely viable strategy. We'll see what Brew responds to that. Normally, I'm not a fan of Dark Age farms. However, Chinese have more food on their farm, so this is a little bit less problematic for a Chinese player here. And Brew doesn't really react to that scout running close to his TC, which means that at the end of the day, this scout will live to see another day. And I'm not sure, but it is possible that Brew has spotted the militias coming his way. He's just getting his barracks up over here, getting a house up. It is likely that he has spotted those militias because he has been starting to walling up over here pretty rapidly. And now he's gonna go for a gold mine. The problem is that this gold mine would be great if your opponent is playing scouts because those guys can't access these Voyagers. But when you're going to play archers against archers, this gold mine is pretty bad. In fact, I'm just noticing that Brew has missed out on 2 of his sheep here, which is a bit of a potato scouting, if you ask me. I'm not sure how that even happened. Oh, that's so unlucky for Brew. He's missing those sheep by just a tile, but that is extremely unfortunate for him, and it's obviously going to hinder his Dark Age a little bit. Right now, Brew is just trying to delay those Man-at-Arms from bashing their way through the walls as he is waiting for the archer range. You see that he's using 3 Voyagers to rush that up, so he knows that he needs that archer range like ASAP, because he needs to make sure that those Man-at-Arms don't get through the walls. It is pretty crucial for Uzzi, on the other hand, to keep the Man-at-Arms alive, because he wants to use those Man-at-Arms to get through the walls when he already has archer support. And it looks like he's going to open skirms, which, honestly, I think is a sort of a viable situation over here for him. He's going to get housed for some time, but considering that Brew is going for his own archers, opening with a skirm here for Uzzi isn't necessarily a bad idea because it gives him a little bit of a leverage and advantage over the archers, and that helps keeping those Man-at-Arms alive. So you can potentially keep this push going on a little bit easier if you use a skirm at the beginning to deal with that archer, and that way it's going to be a little bit harder for Brew to defend against this one. So that is a nice move over there from Uzzi, but the fact that he was housed is actually going to delay the arrival of the additional skirmishers, and also this scout from Brew, it could actually pick off a skirmisher because the skirmisher is going to have a minimum range. It's very, very low HP, but you see that Brew is going to ignore that skirmisher for now at least. Skirmisher is coming in here as well from Brew. There is a 3 Voyagers lead right now for him. Both players at about 40 seconds of TC idle time, but Brew is getting a lot more idle time on him, getting housed for a brief moment. And he's getting harassed over here on his gold mine, which is far from ideal. Because one thing that Uzzi has behind this one is a relatively safe eco, and that's a huge advantage at the end of the day. That your eco is getting basically complete safety from the opponent, whereas you're able to at least just, do some harassment on these Voyagers. It's not an awful lot of harassment, but it is a bit of a harassment, and Uzzi is actually able to force a defensive tower over here, which I think is already an achievement, because whenever you're able to force the defensive tower, that means that your opponent is going to have to mine some stone in order to be able to drop additional TCs in Castle Age. So being able to force the defensive tower is huge here. Credits to Brew for being able to keep his archers alive, and he's even healing them inside the town center. That's very smart. I was actually just about to point out that ideally you do not want to lose the archers to the skirmishers over here. And in the meanwhile, Uzzi isn't really going to commit to this push over here, and we will see Brew sending in a couple of archers towards the base of Uzzi. Uzzi 16 on food, only 12 on food for Brew right now. And this is a fight that Uzzi could technically take if he wanted to. Lose his 2 archers. These are the first 2 casualties of this entire game, to be honest. And one of the things that men-at-arms are very, very good at is just soaking up the damage from the skirmishers. So this is why it is so important to keep those men-at-arms alive in this situation, because they can be very, very good at just tanking arrow fire from skirms. They can be good at getting through the walls. But it seems like Brew is going to be able to keep his gold mine intact. And now he's going to be able to counterattack. We'll see what he can do to get some eco damage done. There's a couple of weak villagers around here that could be sniped off. Or there is a woodline over here that could also be exposed to raid. And we'll see if Brew actually takes that villager. It seems like he won't, but that doesn't change the fact that these archers will be hitting these villagers at the best possible time, because they are now actually much further away from the TC than they used to be. So that is one villager killed over there, 2 more running forward to the TC, and they should be able to survive. The scout is going to die to these archers, I'm not sure why Uzzi sent it in. I like the move to pull the villagers to the other side, though. You have to keep those guys alive. You just can't afford to lose units like that. And it looks like Brew is going to force Uzzi to call his entire army back to his base. I don't like that, to be honest, from Uzzi. 2 or 3 skirms would have been more than satisfactory to deal with those archers. In exchange, he has to fall back in this one. That being said, Uzzi is actually looking better in terms of castle age. And an early castle age with the faster firing crossbowmen of Ethiopians, potentially followed by a mangonel push, could be something on the minds of Uzzi. The thing is that it seems somewhat unlikely that he's going to switch into knights, even though his opponent is heavy on skirmishers, because we see double ranges. It is still possible that we're going to have a couple of knights on the field, just to make sure that those skirms will have a very, very painful death and secure the ground for the archers. Right now, military numbers are slightly better for Brew, but Brew is going to be about a minute and a half late to Castle Age over here. This is a pretty scary force, though, so Uzzi may want to mix in a couple of his own skirmishers, or preferably, I would say, a stable, and maybe even 1 or 2 scouts could actually make sense over here, because this army is more or less skirmishers. So if you're playing this smart for Uzzi, you take your skirmishers and pick off the archers, because the skirms alone won't be able to do much damage from Brew. You don't really want to use your archers, because those will be important for Castle Age, so you just pick your skirms and try to pick off the archers from the opponent over here, as we have Uzzi trying to reroll this one. There's a bit of a health on those houses, so this is gonna hold for now. And as I said, I feel like Uzzi, considering that he wants to preserve his archer numbers, he should be using the skirmishers to just defend over here. And it seems like that house is actually going down. This is getting closer and closer. We have a Castle Age coming in here as well from Brew. That was actually a nice move from Uzzi, to be honest. He has thrown away 2 men-at-arms, but that distracted the army of Brew for a second, and it allowed the villager to get a house to a reasonable amount of HP, which means that this whole army isn't going to be able to go inside immediately. And there is a chance that Uzzi is just going to send his entire army forward. That's a mistake in my perspective. Keep the skirms at home. Just send the crossbows and hit the opponent's gold mine potentially, and keep the skirms home. Otherwise, you're just going to get overrun within your own base. Now, that being said, now that Uzzi is up to Castle Age, Brew is going to fall back and regroup and make sure he doesn't lose his army before he's up to Castle Age. He's not far away himself, so by the time Uzzi arrives, as it looks like the skirms will be sent the other way, let's see if Uzzi can intercept that army. If he can pick off the archers, that is excellent value for him. Goes for a fast +2 defense as well. So this is definitely a situation where Brew could be in trouble. Crossbows now coming this way as well. Not a lot of units killed over here, but even 1 or 2 archers could be extremely important in the long run. There's going to be about 20-30 more seconds needed until crossbow and bodkin hits over here, but that's once again a fight that Uzzi is going to be gladly taking. Remember, he's got +2 defense too, and he's got Ethiopian crossbows. So this is actually an excellent fight for Uzzi over there. Picks off a couple of archers, which once again gives him a nice little advantage. It's 11 archers against the 12 though, so at the end of the day, the military numbers are still even between the 2 players. Fast ballistics coming in here for Brew and a defensive siege workshop that will be cancelled eventually. Whereas for Uzzi, that's an interesting decision to go for a defensive siege workshop here, because he wasn't really pushed. So you could have made an argument for a little bit more forward siege workshop somewhere around over here. His farming eco isn't looking great, I'm not gonna lie. In fact, it is looking like an absolute disaster In the meanwhile, the farming eco is much more consistent for Brew. The Chinese extra food on the farms helps immensely when it comes to building up this eco on for Brew, and it looks like Brew is going to counterattack this one. There's a lot of weak pallet sides that could be broken through, especially this part of the wall is what I'm concerned with, because if that is getting broken through, especially with the lead skirm in here, Brew's army is going to be much better than Uzzi's army, and that means that whatever Uzzi does, it's not going to be enough to stop this army, and as I said, these gold miners are dangerously exposed here, and in the meanwhile, Uzzi isn't really willing to commit anything to try and push the base of Brew, which means that Brew can just punish him very easily over here if one vulture gets picked off, and as I said, using the hill advantage over here with the crossbows, you can just take that wall down very fast. Uzzi is going to try to re-wall this, but there is also an opening over there, and even worse, vultures will get picked off, and that means that this is going to be an opening. Uzzi is going to have to fall back with his entire army once again. And behind this one, it is worth noting that there's a 6 vultures lead for Brew, who's getting the second TC up. So, yeah, it may seem like, okay, Uzzi is going to hold this one. The main concern is that, well, now that he's losing vultures, but even before that, the fact that he would be defending, but he would be doing so with 1 TC, and Ethiopian economy isn't amazing, whereas Chinese eco is just much better, and Chinese player will also have 2 TCs over here. So, if Uzzi isn't able to start pushing the base of Brew over here in a relatively short amount of time, soon we could see something like Brew just booming away with the score here. So he's gonna be able to get his eco up and running. There is going to be defensive siege cup now against the Mangonels. Ballistics is just coming in for Brew. Excuse me, Uzzi. So it is 22 crossbows against mostly elite skirms. Now this is what I was talking about when it comes to predictability and versatility. I just feel like Ethiopians are just so much reliant on their archers. And you could still make an argument for, you know, trying to get some knights on the field to deal with the skirmishers. However, I feel like Ethiopian cavalry is just not great overall. And at the end of the day, the main problem that you're facing is that your opponent knows exactly that you have to play archers, otherwise your army is just pretty bad. It looks like Brew is actually planning to add some cavalry against the Mangonels, but even more importantly, he decides to turn back with his entire army, and Uzzi has brought in all of his army. We had a 1-for-1, actually that was a 1-for-2 Mangonel trade from Brew. That was a beautiful shot if that is the case. And even more importantly, as I said, this army is about to break into Uzzi's base with Uzzi having 0 defense. It's not like there is an economy that is actually possible to be lost here though, so I would hardly call this an economy. But with that being said, we already have a 16 vultures lead for Brew over here, and that's going to spiral out of control super fast, because now these crossbows are actually going to push into the gold mine, and that could seal the deal here. Not sure if Uzzi noticed this just yet. I don't think he did. I think he's just noticing that this happened over here inside his base, because he was probably too busy microing his mangonels and crossbows. That often happens. While you're busy microing, something disaster happens at the back of your base, and there is 2 mangonels inside here for Brew. I think he's just waiting for the opportunity, pops out 1, deletes the mangonel. This is an old trick. Well, not really an old trick, but it is a trick that can be used to increase the damage output of your mangonel. We have seen examples of that. I think Hero was the first one that really started using this one, and now that the crossbows are a little bit more clumped up, you will unpop the second mangonel, and the lead skirms will just slowly overrun the crossbows, and in the meanwhile, Brew, that wasn't actually great, but he's absolutely slaughtering this army, and that's the problem that Ethiopians are facing right now. You don't really have a great answer against the skirmisher play of your opponent right now. You would technically have your options if you had a better eco, but this was a fairly fast castle age here from Uzzi, which means that he didn't really have an amazing eco behind that, and was counting on the crossbows to do damage. The Mangon was going to be able to hold back the skirmishers for a while, apparently, resulting in quite a lot of dead bodies from Brew's side. But as I said, Brew is just big chilling over here right now. 21 vultures lead. Army values are actually pretty close, but there is a 40 population lead right now for Brew, who is just living a happy life, and he's soon going to have cavalry on the field as well. In fact, he's gonna go bloodlines, double stable knights. He's hiding those right now, but when he's gonna unpop them, he's just going to be able to take down the mangonels. Especially such undefended mangonels is not a thing that should ever happen for Uzzi. Right now, he doesn't know that his opponent has cavalry on the field, but you always have to assume that you can't just leave mangonels like this out in the open. That being said, as I said, it's free TCs for Brew. He also has the Chinese farming extra food on the TC. Did I just say extra food on the TC? It is actually extra food on farms, but he also has heavy plow here. I didn't actually say this one, but I'm going to say this here in the middle of this series. I apologize in advance, YouTube, for this one being a little bit sloppier cast than my usual. What you don't know if you're watching this on YouTube is that I have casted 8 hours today already. I took about a 2 hours break, but I've casted 8 hours of tournaments, show matches today. So I may be a little bit exhausted mentally. Anyways, as I said, Knights here with +2 defense will be able to soak up enough damage to be able to dive in on the mangonels, and that's a fairly clean micro from Brew. Wasn't perfect, he lost a couple of skirms to the mangonels, but it is good enough given the circumstances. He lost like a couple of skirmishers in exchange for 4 mangonels, and that is an absolute slaughter. Now we are talking about 30 army against 4. Brew takes game number 1, and well, I think Uzzi had his options, but you can see that he was trying to play for the fast crossbowman play, but that didn't really materialize. And this archer play that killed a couple of Voyagers and idled a lot was extremely bad for him. At the end of the day, Brew killed 9 Voyagers, only lost 3. But it was also about the fact that Brew had a much cleaner transition into a 3 TC play, whereas his opponent ended up on 2 TCs and a 26 Voyager deficit. Uzzi, by the way, I think is something like seed 56 or so, and that would mean that Brew is somewhere around seed 10, 15-ish. I don't have exact numbers on my mind, but that's about right, I would say. So we will be taking a look at the civilization draft. Chinese was Brew's first pick. He's using that on Arabia. And Ethiopians are gone for Uzzi. So we're going to Uzzi's home map, which is going to be cross or slopes. For slopes, he has Indians, but as I said, I feel like Indians are overrated on the new version of slopes. I've said this in multiple of my casts, and I'll probably mention that a couple more times as well. With that being said, it is time to jump into game number 2 over here, which is going to be cross, or 4 legs as it is known as well. So we are gonna have Brew playing Huns over here, which is one of the best, if not the best, civilizations to play on cross. Other side is going to be Uzzi playing as Japanese. Again, one of the stronger civilizations on this map. So what makes Huns good on cross is that they don't need to invest into houses, which helps immensely overall. So they have a little bit more wood that they can spare. They have faster working stables, which could be extremely useful for the scouts play. They have cheap cav archers, and the thing is that this map usually is played with 1 town center in early castle age, so you don't add TC number 2 and 3. Instead, you focus on expanding your fishing eco to additional lakes. And 1 TC triple range cav archers is extremely dangerous from Huns, so that's basically the main reason why Huns are so popular on this map. Probably one of the most picked civilizations overall on this map. Other side, Japanese for Uzzi. Obviously, the Japanese fishing ships are much harder to kill, but it's also about Japanese fishing ships gathering faster, so Japanese can actually skyrocket their eco with a good fish boom over here. They're a little bit more one-dimensional than Huns. In fact, they are pretty heavy on the archer play. However, what you're counting on when you're using Japanese over here on this map is having a very strong eco with the fishing, and then being able to just snowball the game with crossbow, arbalest, or so. Castle Age Knights are completely viable as well for Japanese, even though in Imperial they are lacking the +4 defense upgrade, which means that late game Imperial Age Japanese cavalry is pretty bad. With that being said, we're going to have Brew pushing in the deer over here, chooses a rather safe woodland, and overall his base isn't looking that bad. He doesn't have to protect this gold necessarily, because he has another gold mine over here, so he could do something like wall here, and potentially wall here, and that would secure this gold mine over here. He would have a back wood line as well, and now he's moving out to take the dock. The problem here that he's going to be facing is that Uzzi is actually looking for that Voyager, and indeed he's going to find one. That is an excellent fight by Uzzi, and somewhat sloppy from Brew that he didn't expect that. Like, you either send that Voyager out with Loom, especially for such a big distance as Brew. Nice quick was from our Brazilian player over here. So you either send that Voyager out with Loom on it, or you're actually going to send that Voyager out with the Scout supporting. And it looks like now the Scout of Uzzi has taken quite a lot of damage, so he's gonna have to disengage. We'll see if he turns back and takes the fight with the heal, but nope. He's just going to disengage completely. Another lady is going to take the job of the dock builder. Other side, we have Uzzi with dock almost finished, so he's gonna have a nice little advantage from that. It's like half a minute, maybe a little less than that in terms of game time in dock advantage. So that dock was a little bit delayed from Brew, but it shouldn't really be impacting him significantly, to be honest. This is actually going to be a tricky border because this board is pretty far away if you have to walk all the way through here. So Brew is going to have to be careful not to lose a Voyager to that. That being said, there were 5 hits delivered on the Scout of Uzzi here. He's down to 30 HP. And for him, he's got a beautiful gold mine over here. Easy wall off here if he wants to. Alternative would be to wall here, and that would secure the entire lake and prevent his opponent from sneaking up a dock on him. There is 2 unclaimed geese over here on the far left, and there is quite a lot of wood that is rather safe for Uzzi, so I can see multiple walls happening here on the left side. Considering that there is a hole over here, I would say the most reasonable wall may be over here and here, but you could see something like this, and then one pass side wall over here, and then wall between the edge of the forest over here and the TC. That could be something as well. Anyways, compared to the previous version of Cross that was used in Hidden Cup 3, now there is relics also on land, so not just in the corners. Each corner used to have one relic in Hidden Cup 3, and the final relic was in the middle of the map. Now, the corners still have the relics, but because you need to make a transport ship to claim them, most players ignore them overall, so that is why a bunch of relics were added to the land part of the map. So this map combines for 8 relics overall, which I think in the main event could result in the use of Lithuanians pretty heavily on this map, because Lithuanians generally are decent hybrid map civilization. With the extra food they start with, they can get to a rather fast feudal age, and that can be very, very helpful. And as I said, 8 relics available on this map could be very, very tempting as a Lithuanian player. Now, we have 2 forward Voyagers over here from Uzzi, and 2 going to the other side, and now they might join forces. What is the plan here? This seems like it's going to be a forward base type of a scenario. Maybe he wants to sneak a dock upon his opponent, but that's going to be pretty challenging. There's a barracks, and indeed there is the forward base for barracks. So if that is the case, what I can imagine is probably forward barracks, men-at-arms into towers, or maybe men-at-arms archers from Uzzi. And Japanese men-at-arms are pretty tough, so that would be quite challenging to stop. The condition here, though, is that if you do this, you have to be walled back at home. Otherwise, the Hunnic player is going to be playing scouts, and he's just going to raid your base to absolute death because you have the slower army. So you kind of have to force your opponent to fight over here. Feudal Age has just hit for Uzzi, so he's trying to stop this Voyager from walling, and he's gonna bring in the boys. Loses the Scout. That was a disaster for him, because he didn't even kill the last Voyager. Could have also done that. He needs to focus down the wheel, and we are going to see Spearmen, interestingly. So no men-at-arms. This is going to be a Spear and Skirm rush, apparently. That's an ambitious archer range, I have to say. Now, if this doesn't go up, this might be GG over here, to be honest. But with that being said, Brew is going to be forced to defend with an archer range, so he's not going to have scouts on the field either for the time being. Voyagers taking the Voyager fight. One of the advantages that Brew is getting when it comes to Voyager fighting is that he's always able to pour more wheels. That's why I don't understand this positioning from Uzzi. I think he really wants to get some archers into the opponent's eco, but I mean, as I said, Brew is able to pull more Voyagers and just bash these wheels down. The walls have been finished, which means that it is impossible for Uzzi to bring in any more Spearmen, and that means that he's only left with archers, and the appropriate defense here from Brew would be to just go for his own skirms. Voyagers are getting poked down over here by the Spearmen. We do have what appears to be 6 fishing ships, even 7, from Uzzi. We have 6 from Brew, and Brew is not moving out for another pond, neither is Uzzi, but we already have a couple of villagers killed here from Uzzi. He also killed one, but he's going to end this skirmish with 1 villager killed and 3 lost in this one. Now here are the archers, but as I said, if Brew is making like 2 or 3 skirmishers over here, he's gonna have no trouble defending against this one. In fact, what he can do is just either pull villagers to bash this one down or wall this one in. That would be absolutely viable in this case to prevent additional archers from getting into his eco. In the meanwhile, as I said, it is 9 fishing ships now for Uzzi, so this basically, I think that he just wants to convert this into sort of a fast castle play. So he didn't want to play the scout war type of a scenario, or he didn't want to play conventional. He's forcing Brew to defend here with skirmishers, and I believe that Brew originally wanted to play with scouts, and from that perspective, this is an achievement for Uzzi. He was able to prevent his opponent from going for his desired unit composition, and that means that Uzzi may be able to just go up to Castage over here. His gold count is looking good enough for him to potentially justify a market. It looks like we're going to have an archer range back at home for him, but as I said, I could have understood if there was a market and just buy himself up. We have a galley here for Uzzi to prevent any potential dockings. You just have to patrol that galley on that shoreline. And this villager is moving out for the other pond, and it's going to be secured by a spearman as well. So Uzzi is expanding, so is Brew. Brew also will be spotted, I believe, here by Uzzi. So right when seeing that villager, Uzzi turns back, and unlucky for him, he's gonna get his villager picked off over here by a full HP scout. That villager is dead, so there is no way of escaping unless you do some crazy quick walls, which I don't see happening right now. Indeed, this villager is gonna bite dust, so each player is gonna have 2 pawns at the end of the day. I would love to see Brew just walling in at archer range just to prevent his opponent from potentially massing archers and then unpopping them at an unfortunate time. And it looks like Uzzi is still far away from Castage. He had much better resources not too long ago, so I wonder what happened. He's investing heavily into archers back at home. We will see if that actually works out for him, but I'm not necessarily a fan of it. His opponent is fully walled, his opponent is gonna have 2 pawns, just like him, but there is also a dock here from Brew. Getting a fire galley out, I don't think that Uzzi knows about this dock over here. However, one thing that is an advantage he has no idea about the dock, is that his fishing ships will withstand a lot of punishment from fire galleys. So in this case, it would be reasonable for Brew to actually add the galley at the beginning to start killing the fishing ships with, instead of fire galley, because galleys are a little bit faster killing fire galleys. Uzzi is very, very heavy on the fishing on his own lake, but he will soon have to start replacing these expired fish with the fish traps, and that could be problematic for Uzzi. Like, the thing is that he doesn't have a very, very consistent food eco after these fishing ships run out of food, and that's going to happen pretty soon. But he doesn't really seem to have the wood to start adding fish traps anytime soon, and he's probably focusing on adding fire galleys here and fishing ships. In the meanwhile, archers assembling over here. There is a couple of skirms in the party as well for Brew. He's got no armor upgrade, but he has fletching, same thing for Uzzi. For now, Uzzi is also having a lot more TCR time. So now if you take a look at the eco counts, it's 47 to 42. Brew once again building up a nice little economy lead. And Brew is going to click up to Castage a couple of seconds earlier than his opponent. Second range probably followed by a third one from Brew, and it will be a triple range Cav Archer build, which I think is the right thing to do here. You will have the mobility advantage, so even though Uzzi is able to get archers out right away and he can actually mass his archers before Castle Age, the mobility advantage is going to be huge. Once again, I don't like that this archer range was completely ignored here, and there's actually a hole here on Brew's walls. Now, I'm not sure if Uzzi or Brew noticed this, but I think what happened is that Uzzi was using the select all archer ranges hotkey, and he has the rally point set somewhere around over here. So this archer popped out of this range and walked all the way out. But we don't know if Brew saw this one or Uzzi saw this one. Because if either of them saw it, they will be aware that there is a hole over there, because there is definitely a hole over there. We saw the archer walking through. over here. Anyways, it looks like Uzzi is going to be losing this pawn over here, which will mean we'll have 3-1 pawns. And as I said, this is the problem. This is the final deposit of fish on this pawn, this little salmon that is left. And then suddenly Uzzi will be without reliable food income because 11 fishing trips will be idle, and it doesn't seem like he's gonna have the wood to start, you know, just massing fish traps overall. Archers will start moving up and potentially hitting that gold mine over there, and indeed triple range cav archers. That is going to be a fast husbandry most likely, but bloodlines first it seems like for Brew. And this is just basically the textbook way of playing cross so far from Brew, with the exception of almost getting his vulture killed at the beginning. Anyways, defensive siege workshop coming in here for Brew. Once again, it looks like Brew was able to notice the hole over here. So he did see the archer walking out, and he's gonna have that walled off by now. This is still a weak spot because it's not like Brew can wall behind this one very easily, but he's just gonna make a siege workshop and a mangonel, or he might even be able to defend with a couple of cav archers. Other side, archers were actually cleaned up over here, but a lot of low HP villagers are worth monitoring over here inside Uzzi's eco, and Brew has a 10 villagers lead right now. So Brew was able to establish his fishing eco on the second pond, which is huge. He's also running out of deep fish on this pond, but it is more important for him that he has a second pond over here, whereas it seems like Uzzi wasn't really able to secure this pond for himself. This is kind of neutral right now, neither of the players have good enough control over that to justify fishing. And we'll have a TC coming up here, which is a little bit ambitious from Brew, especially with those crossbows roaming around. The Mangano is going to be coming in here, and as I said, that's a little bit overly ambitious from Brew that he can just get that up that easily. And the crossbows will now move in. Mangano comes out to help. One villager bites the dust. Wasn't perfect from Brew, but he's going to get away with this one for now. Mangano not really able to find an angle right now, but will actually get a good shot out. There is still a couple of upgrades missing for cav archers, but they're getting there. There is no ballistics, but they do have bloodlines. Soon they will have husbandry as well, most likely. Especially with that food count, you probably start making husbandry. There's also a knight on the field for Brew, potentially to deal with some scorpions that are coming in. And as I said, the fishing eco is going to be kind of inefficient for Uzzi over here. He's soon running out of this final deposit of fish inside his pond. He only has 2 fish traps, and the other pond, it's not like he has any fishing ships on this one either. And even if he wins this fight, it's going to take quite a lot of time for him to build up that fishing eco, whereas his opponent already has a very well established fishing eco on the left side, resulting in about an 11 Voyagers lead for Brew over here, and a constant flow of those cheap honey cav archers supported by Mangonels. Wouldn't even be surprised to see a forward siege workshop if Brew is able to secure some ground for himself and press on with the Castle Age pressure. He doesn't have to press on with the Castle Age pressure, by the way, as he's playing 2 TC, and he has 2 pawns, whereas his opponent has 1 pawn that is securely controlled, and there's the forward siege workshop from Brew indeed. Plus 2 defense coming in. It would be ideal if Brew actually waited until that kicks in before taking the fights, but he wants to secure this ground. This is a nice one because the presence of this one will pretty much prevent Uzzi from mining stone over here, denies that gold mine sort of as well, and opens up the possibility of pushing either this archer range or this town center as well with mangonels. And it seems like Brew is getting some more fire galleys out here. You could make a case for the war galley upgrade for Brew for the sake of, as we have a rather decent hit over here. It's worth noting that Uzzi keeps making crossbows on this archer range. This is definitely because he's using the select all archer ranges hotkey. And this is why I am not necessarily a fan of that hotkey for random map games. Because oftentimes it could be leading to situations like this where you have an archer range, for example, that you're not actually wanting to use, and that's a lot of thrown away resources because those knights are killing those crossbows one by one. That's a lot of resources going down the drain here. It's not like that would be the deciding factor, because currently it seems like the deciding factor is that we have 23-5 army, and the cav archers are also much more devastating when it comes to, you know, one-on-one fights. So even if this was even numbers, the cav archers would probably be dominating that. Uzzi taps out in the second game, and with that, Brew is 1 game away from getting into the next round of a Hidden Cup for qualifiers. 50 kills for him, 25 deaths. It was a pretty clean game overall from our Brazilian player. Alright, so let's take a look at the draft over here. So Huns are taken, and it looks like Brew is just picking his civilizations in order. And in the meanwhile, Japanese are gone for Uzzi. Uzzi's other home map is Slopes, and I would think that he's gonna be picking Indians here. Response from Brew, I think it could and should be Khmer. That would be a very, very intriguing civilization pick for Slopes. Other than that, though, there is Hideout and Bay, so Khmer is more likely to be picked on Hideout. Bay is likely to be Persians or Italians. But I think that the Bay is gonna be Persians or Italians in that case, and you're going to use Persians over here. That could be a reasonable idea for this map. Personally, I wouldn't mind using Khmer on Slopes, though. I think it's actually a very, very good civilization pick. I will explain that in a moment why. But let's jump into game number 3 over here. Give me a moment to bring that one up. And off we go. So it looks like Uzzi is going to switch away from yellow color to blue over here. And we'll have him playing right side Indians in blue, no surprise about that. Opponent is going to be Brew playing as Vietnamese, interestingly. Now that is a surprising Civ selection for this map. It could be related to the fact that Brew feels confident about his chances in his series here, and he doesn't want to reveal any strategies for future rounds, but this map is open enough to require a scout civilization to be used. So this is why I'm surprised about Indians, and this is why I said Khmer or Persians are my picks for this map, because you need to have a civilization that is reasonable with scouts, and Vietnamese isn't really one of those. Now, Vietnamese is a solid archer civ overall, but I feel like you're kind of throwing away most of the bonuses that Vietnamese give you. For example, on Slopes, you can predict where the opponent is at because you're always like on the opposite side of this lowland area. So the fact that you see where exactly your opponent's TC is a completely useless bonus over here for the Vietnamese because you know where the opponent is anyways. Lumber camp upgrades, not costing you wood is nice, but it's not something that's like a decisive advantage. Other than that, extra health on the archers, sure, it's nice. But I feel like this, with such an open map, I could have made a case for an scout civ more. But we'll see what the Brew has on his mind with Vietnamese. So the changes that have been implemented compared to Hidden Cup 3 is that there is way less shorefish over here on one side, and now the deer isn't only appearing on one side, but they are split between the two. So instead of one big patch of deer on one side and one big pond of fish, it's now small pond of fish and deer on both sides. This also is, I think, a marshland terrain, which means that it is walkable by units. So walling in your villages is much more challenging over here, and it looks like we're going to have a lumber camp first approach here by Uzzi, bringing in the boars. Lumber camp first is well from Brew, so it seems like these players are not willing to move out for the shorefish and the hunt. Some players like to do that, some players do not. I think it's going to be an interesting debate to see how the players will prioritize the outside shorefish and hunt in the main event of Hidden Cup, because no one really knows if there will be many pro players moving out to take the pawns. I feel like there is a little bit of a too much risk with that. You can get a decent benefit from it, but it's really risky to send those villagers out there. So I could completely understand players saying, okay, we don't want to use those and just live on with the berries. That being said, indeed, Brew is going to be the conventional player over here. He doesn't want to risk the life of his villagers by moving out to the ponds right now. He's going to go for the berries. And Uzzi is the one taking the risks, and he's going to send out the villagers for the shorefish with Indians. That's going to be a very, very nice source of food for him, obviously, with the Indian shorefishing bonus. But you also want to take the hunt after you finished with the fish over here. What I do not like for Uzzi is that he's doing this without the loom. And if there was a drush coming from Brew, like a premium drush potentially, it would be arriving around this time, and he would be completely defenseless against a bunch of militias, and he could be losing 2 or 3 villagers. The other thing is that if you send your villagers one by one like he did, a scout could also try intercepting them, and there's a big hill over here, which means that the scout could even be attacking downhills, and it will be very, very easy to kill a Voyager. Anyways, now Uzzi is gonna go for a Loom, and I wonder if he wants to click up after this to make this one a 19 pop scouts. 19 pop scouts with Indians should be doable over here, and it is possible. Other side, let's see what the Brew has on his mind. He's gonna get a Barracks out. This is an early Barracks, makes me wonder if this is going to be a Man-at-Arms play from him. And Man-at-Arms opening is actually pretty reasonable against Scouts openings, because Man-at-Arms are actually pretty decent against Scouts overall. 21 pop, actually 22 pop is going to be the up, so this has to be Man-at-Arms play from Brew with such a Barracks timing. If you are Vold up, the Man-at-Arms play is more than viable for Brew here, but you kind of have to be Vold, otherwise you will just get destroyed by Scouts. Anyways, so far Uzzi hasn't really been punished for moving out over here, which is a nice benefit that he's having in this one. As I said, when the Shorefish runs out, you still want to take the hunt here as well. And the Fuel Age is going to be better for Uzzi here, so he wants to wait with this fight until he gets his Fuel Age upgrade in. And for now, he is taking the hill. This is gonna be tricky. He needs to wait, but turn back at the right time. He needs to wait about, yeah, he needs to go down to like 5 seconds and now turn back and fight. You have to turn back and fight now, though. And as he is reaching Fuel Age, he turns back, he gets the attack upgrade, and the reason why Brew is not running away is because the opponent's scout is faster here, so you know that you cannot run away. You have to fight this one and settle with the fact that you are going to lose your scout and do as much damage to the opponent's scout as possible. Anyways, militias are coming in here for Brew, coming in here with some interestingly shaped walls. I mean, you could have just walled like this, I guess, but this secures the barriers a little bit more. So I'm not necessarily mad about these walls, but they are a little bit weird to my taste. Anyways, everything else will be fully walled over here by Brew. And this scout is too weak to actually kill a villager over here. And the Man-at-Arms may be heading to the other pond, and that would be a disaster for Uzzi, because as much as he was out here, he's taking the hunt. I think Brew probably suspected that his opponent is actually going to get to the other side as well, because he wants to capitalize on all the accessible shorefish. And as I said, this is the textbook way of playing Man-at-Arms against scouts. If you're fully walled, the scouts cannot do damage to you. But your Man-at-Arms will be able to do quite a lot of damage to exposed Voyagers. Worst case scenario is that you trade your Man-at-Arms to Scouts, which is still viable in the majority of the cases. So here come the Man-at-Arms, and that is going to be a lot of dead Voyagers, because the Man-at-Arms will even be attacking down hills, so at least 1 or 2 Voyagers will bite the dust. Uzzi, I think this is a nice move. He kind of separates one Voyager from the rest of the group, and this lady is pretty much sacrificed for the sake of saving the rest of the villas over here. Imagine if Brew even had his scout alive here. He would be able to block those Voyagers. Takes down one, and now Uzzi is forced to rush up some walls over here, which is going to be pretty tough because there is still a lot of openings here. Palisade wall foundations have been nerfed, so it is extremely easy for these Man-at-Arms to get through these walls. We'll see if they will be able to, or they can just walk all the way around. I don't think that Uzzi can actually plug this hole in here in time, but it looks like Brew thinks that that is already closed and he's going to walk up this way. Goes for a Spearman to support the Man-at-Arms against the Scouts, and here in this case, you could make an argument for Brew trying to knock down that stable. Because the thing is that you can always wall behind this Palisade wall, but if you start knocking down that stable, at some point Uzzi is going to have to start repairing that, and that's going to cost him quite a lot of wood. Uzzi doesn't have a Voyager close by though, and that's a disaster. That's a big disaster that he doesn't have a Voyager close by. The Voyager is going to get there just in time. That was like a last second save. If this Voyager arrives a couple of seconds later, this would have been an absolute disaster for Uzzi. As I said, Man-at-Arms are actually pretty reasonable against buildings, so especially with archers behind this one, you're able to prevent Uzzi from repairing the stable, and that stable could go down very, very easily. And it's not like Uzzi's army is actually suitable for dealing with this army over here. There is 2 spearmen, 3 Men-at-Arms, 2 archers. This is not something that you can take down with 5 scouts without taking huge losses. And because, like, Uzzi's Indians, but did he actually get a huge benefit from Indians here? Probably not. He took a pond of shorefish, nice. That's extra 400 food for him, nice and easy food income, but that's basically all. In exchange, Brew's got a generally decent eco with the cheap lumber camp upgrade that helps quite a bit. His archers are also sturdier, and this man-at-arms play is going to take that stable down no matter what. And now Uzzi is gonna go for his own skirmishers. At this point, the ecos are looking pretty comparable of the two players, but I feel like it's already a huge achievement that you're able to take down a stable here, because that stable is extremely expensive and valuable right now for Brew. He also sees the skirms, so he knows that his opponent is going to go heavy on skirms, which could potentially turn into an archer switch. And when it turns into an archer switch, it is also possible that we're going to see cav archers from the Indian player, because Indian cavalry archers are pretty well upgradable. I think they might even be fully upgraded. So Indian cav archers is actually a reasonable idea, even though they don't have any civilization-specific bonuses for them. But generally, the fact that you have most of the upgrades available for them makes them a relatively viable unit. We have seen that a couple of times in Hidden Cup 3 on this map. So now the skirms are in here, men-at-arms still taking a reasonable engagement, and at the end of the day, these skirms are trying to pick off the spearmen, but see, this is an okay trade for Brew here. He took down a stable, he's taking down all the scouts, for example, and he still has the men-at-arms alive. So this was more than reasonable for him. He's floating quite a lot of goats, so soon a market could make sense for him. Let's see if he's gonna do that now that he has lost that army. He's playing single range archers, and he's got 14 on foods. 14 is the food voyager count as well for Uzzi, who doesn't really want to go out there. I like this spearman quite a bit from Brew. This is going to see if Uzzi comes back to this pond, and that way Brew is going to know if he needs to send any forces over there. That's basically the thought process behind this one. It looks like we're gonna have pretty similar castle age times over here. That is going to be a blacksmith as the second building for Brew in feudal. As I said, he's floating quite a lot of gold, but he seems like he's going to be upping with a blacksmith here, which means that we're gonna have to wait until he piles up the food that is needed to click up. Whereas his opponent is going to do sort of the same thing. Archer range blacksmith will be the buildings that he's gonna use to go up. The next question, however, is what are these villagers doing here? Are they planning to build a lumber camp or so? Later on, this would be a perfect TC spot, and in fact, Uzzi's resource count is actually looking very, very good for a TC being dropped here. However, this is going to be an awful lot of voyager idle time. You already see that he has triple the villa idle time as his opponent does. And it looks like we're going to have a second range coming in here, so just good old-fashioned crossbowman, probably crossbowman mangonel play from Brew over here. And in the meanwhile, there's going to be lumber camp for Uzzi. Uzzi is really floating a lot of wood. The problem that I'm seeing here for Uzzi is that I don't know what units he's gonna go for. He's got one range that is not making any units, and now he's gonna add a couple of skirms. The thing is that skirms are absolutely viable against Vietnamese, but Vietnamese can always mix in potentially a couple of elephants. And if you go like absolute full skirms, the knights could still be viable for Vietnamese. You don't really wanna make a lot of knights as Vietnamese, even though in Castle Age they're completely fine. But you don't really want to go heavy on cavalry line, because Vietnamese cavalry isn't amazing in late Imperial. But it is completely viable for Brew to get a stable out and get some knights out if the opponent is going for full skirms, and that is going to be the case. So it's gonna be an army of about 12 crossbows and a couple of knights. Skirms over here will not really be useful, to be honest. These guys will be very, very mispositioned. Like, it's not like these guys can kill villagers because they have so low damage output. In the meanwhile, they will be much needed at this part of Uzzi's base, who is going for a second range over here, and Elite Skirm. Crossbowman is almost in. Elite Skirm will be delayed by the fact that there was one more Skirm queued up before that, and that's going to hurt quite badly, because these crossbows, they might be able to hit these villagers on the gold mine. Elite skirms are out. And let's see if we're going to see a forward siege workshop from Brew over here. No, not just yet. We will have TC being built over here by Uzzi. That's the second TC that he's gonna have. And Brew seems like he's going to be playing with one TC and a fast ballistics. So something similar to what we have seen in game number 1 frame. And as I said, Elite Skirm was delayed a tiny bit, and that is going to hurt quite a bit, because that's going to result in the loss of potentially a couple of villagers. And even more important, the skirmishers do not have the archer armor, and I think one of the very, very underrated things to know about this game is that the skirmishers that are meant to counter the crossbows are not actually good if you don't have the archer armor upgrades on them. At least +1, but preferably +2 is what you desire to have, and you saw that those skirms were just absolutely massacred by the crossbows. There was barely any crossbow lost. It's 14 to 8 KD, and there is knights already coming in here. And the real concern right now for Uzzi is Vulture idle time. So yeah, I mean, he isn't losing an awful lot of villas. There is only two vultures killed from Brew, and one of those were in Dark Age, or not Dark Age, but early feudal with the Man-at-Arms. But the problem is that he's having a 26 minutes idle time compared to 7 minutes. Also, TC is idle for a lot longer as well. And it looks like we're gonna have a couple of crossbows over here. Still no Siege Workshop on the front from Brew. In this one, he just pretty much wants to deny farming space from his opponent at this very moment. And look at how much idle time Uzzi has right now. Uzzi is forced to micro this one, and now he has +1 armor, which is extremely helpful, and probably will allow him to hold this one for now. But it is about the immense amount of idle time that he's facing. And even though he's going to be 2 TCs, he's going to be starting with a 5 Vulture deficit, and the Brew is already making TC number 2 and 3. So somewhat similar to the first game, Brew went for a fast ballistics, and then later on start adding TC number 2 and 3, and that allows him to still have a pretty reasonable eco, but also have a nice early castle age push over here. There is a knight that could still run into the gold miners, and there's just an awful lot of idle time right now for Uzzi. 37 minutes compared to 8, and as I said, there isn't really a huge amount of skirms over here. Now crossbow upgrade for Uzzi, but crossbow upgrade for one archer that is on the field, that's not viable at all, in fact. So you upgrade your crossbows if you have at least like 5 of them or so. There is no point upgrading one archer. Obviously you can make more, but do you really want to do that right now? It's not like you can catch up anyways, and even then, even if you catch up, you have to think about the fact that the Vietnamese archers are stronger individually, and that's something that's worth keeping in mind as well. And the knights will now find this wood line over here, which will probably result in 4 vultures lost, because even if the quick walls would happen, there is a couple of crossbows here that could actually make this happen. That is a nice quick wall from Uzzi at the end of the day. Traps that one knight, but it doesn't matter because these 2 vultures will die, so will this one. And at the same time, the crossbows over here could start picking off vultures. They take away a farm, and now that the skirms are forced to defend over here, the knights can actually come in to help. Would be nice for Brew to have at least +1 defense on these knights so that he doesn't lose them that easily, but once again, that's just unnecessary. And now we are talking about a 15 vultures lead for Brew, who's on 3 TCs, and also worth noting that there is very, very few wood income for Uzzi right now. Like, he's trying to get another TC up over here, but most of the wood is here on the outside, and you see that the wood lines from Uzzi were pretty much idle. Over here, this wood line had to be abandoned, so the wood income isn't really reliable right now for Uzzi. Now it is that he has sent a bunch of warriors to make another TC over here, and he's gonna be sending all these to wood. But in the meanwhile, we are talking about a 16 Voyages lead for Brew. And it's not like Brew has to invest into an awful lot of army, because he's barely getting touched, to be honest, to a point where you could actually make a case for just him going into Imperial and finishing this game off with Arblast. Although, considering the fact that he's on stone, it is more likely that he's just going to castle drop his opponent. In such a scenario, it's actually worth it more to drop a castle here, because this is where the majority of the opponent's vultures are, and a castle here would actually make life pretty hard. You could also start making Rattan Archers, and Rattan Archers would be very, very good against the Indian crossbows as well, because of their extra pierce armor. So that's one other reason why I don't think that it is viable for Uzzi to go for his own crossbowman, because eventually he's going to be facing Rattan Archers. And look at this, Brew is actually triggering this army and forcing Uzzi to fight this fight, and simultaneously is moving in the crossbow. So this is intentional from Brew. He's making sure that Uzzi is looking at this screen right now, and in the meanwhile he's bringing in the crossbows from the other side, so he's able to get a full villager picks on the farms. Consistent 14-15 villagers lead right now, and he's also going to take the hill advantage. He has +1 defense, his opponent is having a +1 as well, but hill advantage, Vietnamese HP advantage as well is over there, and even if this army gets cleaned up, we will still be talking about relatively even military numbers. And this crossbow is just chilling right next to the TC. You can see that Uzzi is focusing on this fight because he didn't notice like this crossbowman just big chilling right next to that TC. And there's already a forward siege workshop coming in here from Brew. Soon going to be a castle, and he's going to go up to Imperial. And the thing is that if it turns into a skirmisher war, that is also something that Vietnamese are more than happy to take, because they will have access to Imperial skirmisher. And this one, indeed, at this point, siege workshop is up, university is already up as well, which means that I think Brew is just waiting for the market to sell some food, maybe some stone, and click up to Imperial. And that would completely seal the deal, because Uzzi is not even remotely close to going into Imp. And even if he goes into Imperial, his late game composition isn't great. Like, he's not gonna have Hour Blast available. He could try going for elite skirms of his own, but Vietnamese will just be much better at that as well, right? So Vietnamese will have Imperial skirmisher. This is a nice cleanup over here, but as I said, there is already... At this point, I would say that skirmishers and rams could be completely viable for Brew, but I think he's just going to wait until he can get a castle up. Gets +2 defense, and it looks like we're going to have a light cav switch from Uzzi. That could be a pretty dangerous, but here come the villagers for what is going to be a forward castle. So, and if I'm not mistaken, the castle is gonna be targeted over here. The problem is that even though Uzzi is going to get light cav upgrade for himself, there's very few light cav on the field without armor upgrades. And without armor upgrades, even just a couple of crossbows, or dare I say, even a couple of skirmishers, as that is going to be a villager that gets picked off, should be able to deal with like a few light cav. Obviously not like 10-15 light cav, but 2 or 3 light cav they should have no trouble dealing with. And now that this has been cleaned up, Brew is going to start venturing forward even more so. And there is the castle foundation, exactly, right in the face of the opponent, replacing that mill with a majestic castle. And as I said, there is a couple of light cav over here, but you really gotta question if that's actually gonna be enough. That being said, it's a little bit ambitious from Brew to just try to get that castle up over there without knowing what army his opponent has, because if Uzzi would happen to have 10-15 light cav over here instead of 5, then this castle would be denied. And it looks like these are actually intentional siege workshops and arch ranges being placed over here on top of this castle foundation, because that's gonna block the castle. And even though Brew has a massive lead over here, is it that massive anymore? He's gonna be an Imperial, sure, but it's 89 eco compared to 85, and there is light cav coming out here. Brew should still be winning this one. If this castle goes up, Brew probably wins this, as Uzzi is doing the right thing, trying to get the ram up, but I think Uzzi knows as well that this castle is going up and Brew is gonna get this. However, this final move from Brew isn't not something that I really like here. He could have lost all his villagers here if he encountered 10-15 light cav instead of the 5-6 that he encountered right now. Overall, it seemed like Brew was justifying why he was a much higher seed than Uzzi here. Uzzi is a decent player, and I expected a little bit more from him, but it seems like he was just pretty much outplayed in every aspect of the game, which sometimes happens when you have 2 players that are both playing standard, but one of them is more skilled than the other. That means that this is the end of this series, so thank you for tuning in and watching this, and hopefully you have enjoyed, and we'll stick around for some more qualifiers. I will aim to upload all the Hidden Cup qualifiers on my YouTube channel, and also I'll be casting some of them live on Twitch. The live casted ones will also be exported to YouTube, so yeah, I will try to get all the qualifiers in, which is a huge work, obviously, because just this round we have 32 qualifier sets, but well, I will do my best to get all of them to you, so hopefully you have enjoyed, and you will stick around for some more with me